TheJourneyNYC podcast. How's it going? I'm Anthony.
I'm Jesse.
I'm Jacques Noor.
Ooh, anyway, we are here today for the first time recording the Journey NYC podcast in the evening because we are so fortunate to actually be meeting with someone who is literally halfway around the world. So I believe that it is 8:15 in the morning there. So we're going to have him join our call shortly. This individual is amazing. He is a former colleague of mine, which I had the privilege of introducing to his now husband. He is a survivor of many atrocities in life and, you know, a rough upbringing, but he's got a really amazing story. And I think his journey, while it is still unfolding, is quite inspirational, and I think can be inspirational for many people to hear. Jesse, I think you're actually going to like talking to him a lot.
I'm excited to meet him. Let's bring him in.
All right. So without further ado, we're going to bring on Daniel Lucas.
Woo! You gotta have
Yay! Round of applause for Daniel Lucas, who literally walks in at the perfect time.
The frame.
See,
like
that was perfect timing. He literally walked into the room right after we announced it.
How are you, man? You good?
Hey, how's it going, Dan?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Yeah, so our listeners will obviously note that you have quite a cool accent, and yet you were all the way in Australia, where your accent is actually not from.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Not a problem. But I wanted you to meet Jesse. Jesse's our co-host. So Jesse.
Hey,
Jesse.
And then our sound and camera guy who now makes, you know, candid appearances for us is Jacques Noor, who is over in the red.
How are you, man?
What's up, man?
So I was telling all of our listeners is we're now on episode number 12 of the Journey NYC podcast. You and I have known each other now since about 2012, the year of the Olympics in London, where we met.
Not long ago already.
I know, and the great part was on top of actually working together, I got to introduce you and watch you flirt incessantly with your now husband. Then 2 years ago, as I got to be at your wedding, which was absolutely amazing. And I've always known that you had a really rich story, specifically. And then we've chatted a number of times. But I was telling Jesse about you, and I thought it would be a great way for us to have you aboard, and also, you know, share your story and what your journey has been like, because it is quite inspirational and also very inspiring.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So why don't we start here? Why don't we start with tell us where you're from, what childhood was like, you know, where this all started, etc.
So I'm from London, the UK. I grew up in southeast London, which is known for the sun to be shining. No, it's not. It's it's the deep dark south, as we call it. I grew up on housing estate down there. Was estranged from my parents from a very young age, and grew up in orphanages and was moved around quite a bit. Back there, I think the childcare system, even now, still needs a lot of work for the kids that are in it. But back then, it was even worse. So we kind of just got moved around, pillar to post to different locations. But the majority of the time was spent down in London, although we did spend some time up in Liverpool and some other places as well around the UK. I got a twin brother who's identical to me. Brother.
Wait a minute. There's two of you?
There's two, yeah. There's two of us.
Dear Lord.
It's he's still back in the UK. He's still in London. Actually, now I'm in Australia, and he's got his wife and kids now that he's settled down with, and keeps himself out of trouble, which is all we can hope for, which is the good thing. But yeah, I guess growing up, it was pretty difficult. There was a lot of abuse for both my brother and I growing up, both physical, mental, and sexual abuse, which was quite hard to deal with growing up as a kid and as an adolescent in that environment.
Is this the orphanages that a lot of this happens in, or?
Yeah, so a lot of it happened in the orphanages, which was surreal to me as an adult looking back. It's like, you're put into these places, looked after. You're taken from one kind of environment that isn't conducive for a child to be brought up in, put into another environment which is meant to then nurture that child and bring them up and make them safe and give them safe haven. And it was the complete opposite. Just the abuse just continued. And so I think I was about 14 when I kind of discharged myself or ran away from the orphanage and just started working for a mate's dad on a scaffolding firm, and was earning £50 a day at 14, and I was like a millionaire. Living but yeah, so it was a pretty rough start. We got, both of us, my brother and I, both got involved in gangs and that kind of culture, because it was, a means of connecting with people and having a family unit, whether it was right or wrong.
Were you guys placed in orphanages together?
We were for the first part, but I think, listen, we weren't the best or easiest kids to get along with, and I think because of the trauma that we'd been through, up until that point, we'd become very violent, aggressive, out of control, as they would say, kids. Especially when it came to defending each other, and so they decided to split us up, which probably wasn't the best.
When it becomes even more traumatic, because your only constant and your only quote unquote family is now taken away.
Yeah, so that was pretty rough, and we kind of grew further and further apart. The more my brother got involved in gangs and drugs and crime, and I dipped my toe in the water and did a very short stint in a young offenders unit in Liverpool, and I think that was enough for me to kind of realize, okay, cool, this isn't really where I want to go, the direction I want for my life, and kind of made the change. And I think, on the flip side of that, as much as growing up in that kind of environment and being gay was horrifying, like if people found out, it was also, I think, part of my saving grace, because it just enabled me to move out, or forced me to move away from where I was and to find a different community and find a better space to be in.
How did you actually realize that you were gay? I mean, did your brother know? Had you spoken about it together, before you sort of came?
No, so I think I don't even remember the first time I realized I was gay, to be honest. It was, I always knew that I was different. Mm-hmm. And I always knew that I didn't look at girls in the same way as my brother and his mates did. And I knew that I had a different kind of attraction to men as opposed to just friendships.
Sure.
I never really placed it when I was younger. And then I think
I don't think as children you look at it as sexual attraction. It's just, I just like you more.
Yeah.
It's really not it's not anything that I don't think kids relate to the way adults would, put a feeling to. It's just something that,
I idolized men in a different way than what, do you know what I mean? And I found myself.
The way I idolized Jesse.
The way.
Something like that.
And Jacques.
Jacques has to chime in there.
Yeah. You don't idolize me at all. I know that is all the lies.
I idolize anyone who is taller than me, which means all three of you are my idols already.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, okay. So you realize that you're gay, you're different. You come from a pretty rough upbringing. You and your brother are split up. What I think is so amazing is when you were in that youth program is that you actually found the personal strength to figure out that this is not what I want. Because what were you, a teenager, maybe a late teens?
I was in my late teens when I realized that, I wanted gang culture, and crime wasn't where I wanted to spend my life,
Yeah, but I mean, that already, I mean, at that young age, when I think about the things that I did as a late teenager, I still did stupid shit.
Yeah, I mean, I
I
went
mean,
on to do real stupid shit, but but different, you know.
but that was your first good decision, at least.
Yeah, it was. Listen, like young offenders units back then, they're no joke. You know,
Yeah.
you're locked in with some pretty out there people with some wild stories, and you know, as much as people can brand them as bad people, there's a reason why these kids are in there, and they've gone through their own ordeals and their own shit, and they're dealing with it the best that they can. But I think for me, it was just a big eye opener of like, cool, I got one opportunity here to turn my life around and try and do something different, or I'm just going to end up back in and out, back in and out. And that's exactly what happened to my brother. You know, he was in and out of prison his entire life, and he had his turning point, and unfortunately it came a lot later and after he got himself into some serious trouble. But I think, you know, it's for some people it's unfortunate they don't have that moment of realization that, you know, that just because of where they've come from and what they've done, it doesn't mean that they can't turn their life around.
So Dan,
Yeah.
when you decided that, you know, you didn't want that life, what kind of options does a kid have at late teens? I'm trying to put myself in your shoes and think, okay, you know, you've basically been brought up in the system that has taught you certain behavior, and like you're just kind of trying to survive. And you've gotten some trouble and you're like, all right, this isn't the life that I want. I know I want something better for myself, but putting myself in your shoes, I'm trying to think of like, what options did you even feel like you had at that point?
It was really difficult. Like it was, from the outset, from the inside looking out, there was no real options for me. And I always say to this day, the scariest thing that I've ever done was getting out of where I was. Like growing up in the gangs and the culture that I was in and the environment I was in, people look at that from the outside and go, fuck, that's mind blowing. Like, how do you live life like that? But it was what I knew. It was how I was brought up. So for me, it was second nature. It was comfortable. It was, you know, I was used to looking over my shoulder and like living in that lifestyle. The scary point was, cool, now I'm going to move out of that. And I remember moving into central London and getting my first job in a restaurant as a pot wash boy. And I learned very quickly that the way that I spoke to people and how I was acting wasn't appropriate, and it wasn't going to get me far in life. And so for me, that was the biggest challenge. Like I had to swallow my pride and go and be a pot wash boy in a restaurant. You know, that's not a nice job for a lot of people to do, and, you know, but it's a stepping stone in the right direction for me. And yeah, learning very quickly that the way that I'd been brought up and the selfish attitude that I had from the environment that I'd been in, although it had served me up until this point and helped me survive, wasn't going to help me moving forward. And so I
for
got
you, it wasn't like doing like a different program or anything like that. It was like, all that's done now. You're just on your own, basically trying to figure it out at that point.
Just trying to figure it out by myself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I went into restaurants and started working in hospitality, and like I said, started off as a pot wash boy, then became a waiter, and then became a restaurant manager. And, you know, I'd immersed myself into the gay culture as well in London. I think a part of me was like, I'm free, like I can do what I want. And it was, you know, the gay culture is very glitz and glam, and the parties and everything that's always promoted. And, you know, unfortunately I got very heavily involved into the party scene and the drugs and alcohol. And, you know, I replaced one bad environment with another not so good environment. And that became my life then moving forward from there, from a young teenage age up until, you know, recently. I was immersed in drugs and alcohol and partying and whatnot. And it was,
You know what's interesting to me though, Dan, is that from the time that you were, let's say, late teens, early 20s, like you made these conscious choices without the aid of, like, I think, you know, what Jesse was saying is without a program or a support network. Like you literally just made these mindful choices and realizations that, okay, the way I speak to people is not necessarily the best way to speak to people if I want to get ahead in life. You know, to move from being a pot wash boy into being a waiter is a huge step. Like
Yeah.
the social skill and the communication skill, the hospitality that you have to naturally exude, like it brings me back to when you and I first met. Like you have always had the most magnetic personality. Like to think that you taught yourself that is what's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I don't know where it's come from, to be honest. I just I've always had the attitude of treating people the way that you expect to be treated, no matter where they come from, who they are, and what they do. You know, this is we've got one place to live, and we've got to make the most of it. You know, and I just gave myself the environment to be able to grow into that person. And you know, I learned a lot from hospitality, and although it wasn't, I made mistakes along the way. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I've not been an angel since I was a teenager, you know, and it's up until 110 days ago, I relapsed and used again. And it was then that I'm in a program, you know, which Jesse is talking about, you know, and I just want, like, that's one thing I want to point out is I made all of those conscious decisions, and I did a really good job of moving forward with my life and creating a different space and environment for me to be in. But I've never been able to do it and sustain it on a long-term basis until now I've got myself in a program. So up until now, my ego's told me that I can do this by myself. My ego's driven me and said, you don't need anyone else. You've been by yourself since you was little. You can do all of this by yourself. And over the years, even since I've known you, Anthony, I've fallen on and off the wagon.
Sure.
And made some big mistakes in my life. And I've got to the point now where I'm like, cool, like, yeah, I'll pat myself on the back and I'll give myself a nod and say, you've done well. But I know going forwards now that I can't go further without seeking the help that I need, without putting my hands up and saying, hey, do you know what? I don't got this by myself. You know, I gotta get the help from someone else that's been through the same path or something similar and has worked a program and has found success in it. And that's currently where I'm at the moment, you know.
Well, congratulations on 110. That's a huge accomplishment in itself. I've been sober since March of 2012, and the first 90 to 120 days were by far the hardest, because that's just when you're still like in it and you're not far enough out of it to start really looking for, well, for me at least, I wasn't far enough out of it to really be looking forward to the future. I was still kind of like looking back at like the past and the old life, and I hadn't crossed that gap yet. And it takes time, you know, but congratulations. It's a huge accomplishment. When I started this podcast with Anthony, one of the big things we wanted to focus on was taking the kind of format you might see in like a 12-step program meeting, which is like, you know, to have someone qualify around their either addiction or alcoholism. But I thought that, you know, even though that's kind of where that format of like, what was life like, what happened, what is life like now, applies to people in recovery, I think it can apply to anyone in this world, because we're all having different experiences and trials and tribulations. And some of the guests we've had on weren't even really negative kind of like moments in their life. Like going to the Olympics was like actually the highlight of somebody's life, but still it was like a monumental thing that after was like, what do I do now? You know, and what happens, you know, once we like, so I was curious with your story was there anything that happened for you where you were just finally like for me, it was like I got blacked out in the middle of a New York street and got into a street fight and like don't remember a thing about it. Woke up the next morning covered in blood and was like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, that's it. I'm done. You know, it's different for everybody, but was there like one kind of moment for you where you were like, you know what, like you said, I can't do this on my own. I have to, you know, change the way I've been doing things.
Yeah. So congratulations on being sober. First of all, like that's huge. And I think more people should speak up about their sobriety and show that it's something to be proud of. For me, there's been a number of occasions, but the most recent one was I relapsed and unfortunately got to the point where I tried to take my own life, and I was fully willing to check out. I was fully willing to check out and leave everything that I worked for and that I had, my husband, my dogs, my house, like. And I was only unsuccessful because not through my own choice, just through pure luck. And for me, that kind of rocked me to the core. That for me, waking up 2 days later and realizing what I'd done and realizing the possible aftermath that I would have left behind for my husband and my housemate had they have found me and I'd been successful, the pure willingness that I had to just check out, for me, was what changed in my mind and what said, like, okay, cool, you need to now go and get help, because if you're reaching this point in your life, and given how far I've come, and I've done stints of sobriety before, but this was the point of where I was like, okay, cool, now's the time to kind of, you don't have another opportunity of this. If I go off the rails again, you're done. Like there's no turning around. So that was my turning point.
What kind of in your daily life do you see have you found kind of like as a reason to live?
Oh, good question, bro. Definitely my family. Definitely my husband, my 2 dogs. They bring so much happiness into my life, and I want Anthony will tell you, Mark and I are 2 very different human beings, and we've come from 2 very different walks of life. And when we first got together, I didn't think the relationship was going to last. I was like, man, we're so different. Like, he grew up in South Africa with his mum and dad who paid for him to go to university and bought him his first car and did all of that jazz. And but the thing that keeps us together and keeps me driven is I look at him and I want to be a better person and a better individual for him, and to be able to provide for him and the family that we have. And that's the biggest driving factor for me right now.
I think times people who've had suicidal tendencies or tendencies of self-destruction, they're trying to find some sort of peace or happiness. It's just something that gives them a reason for that momentum. And it's kind of this low realization that you're not living just for you, you're living for the people around you. And like, you're not only, other people happy and giving yourself to other people, it's a chain effect. It gives you something else too. That mutual exchange is I find in people who are somewhat suicidal tendencies, it's always something that helps them. If they lose themselves, then they'll lose everything else around them too. Even if they breathing is incomprehensible, they still they realize, like, I'm not just breathing for me, for everybody.
It's true, 100%. And I've got some amazing people in my life right now, who would be devastated if anything happened to me, and just that alone, like. And I've shared with my nearest and dearest that turning point for me, and just the reaction on their face and the disappointment and the upset that was enough for me to realize, okay, cool. You grow up in an environment that I grew up in, and there's not much love in that environment, and so it becomes a bit of a strange, unexpected thing that you don't really see in people, and then when you go through something like that. And you see, there's a look. I can't explain it, but there's a look from the people that I told, and it's just pure love and like just wanting to nurture and help. And for me, that's when I realized, I guess, like, that I've got too much going on to check out right now. Like, it's not my time. And for some reason, whoever people want to call it, God, whatever it is, like, that whatever that energy is, that's the thing that kept me alive. And it kept me alive to go through this experience and come out the other end, and to be able to share and talk about it. And hopefully, you know, someone watches this podcast that's in that same place, and they'll be inspired to, you know, keep pushing, you know.
I know for people that go in those type of environments where you kind of, because gangs are basically supplements for larger families. It says you were estranged for your own, and then you kind of trade that in for you know, the more gay lifestyle and whatever the party scene with those drugs. But when did you learn to like trust yourself? Because you're basically kind of putting yourselves in situations where you're trusting, you know, the violence of the people around you. You know, there's that code that everyone sticks to. Like, when did you kind of just learn? Because I know at some point you just kind of have to just be alone. When did you learn to trust yourself and your own actions?
For me, learning to trust myself was learning self-respect, self-worth, and that I could, that I was good enough. I was just as good as everyone else, you know, and there was people out there that was doing amazing things. And I think fitness for me was my saving grace. Like, it's a bit of a touchy subject, but at the moment, but CrossFit for me was like, I will always have an affinity to CrossFit, you know, and given the whole conversation that's happening at the moment with them, I urge people to stand by CrossFit as a community rather than just one individual. I just want to point that out now, because for me, coming into CrossFit, it taught me everything that I learned in that space and within that community translated to outside of it. Like, I went into CrossFit with coming off the back end of smoking crack, doing crystal meth, drinking most days of the week, to then walking into a gym and learning how to do my first muscle up. Like, I remember walking to the gym and seeing these people doing muscle ups. I was thinking, fuck, I'm never going to be able to do that shit, man. Like, no chance. And then when I got my first muscle up, I was like, okay, cool. Like, I've been practicing muscle ups for 12 weeks. I've just got my first muscle up. Cool. What else can I do? Okay, now I'm back squatting 120 kilos. Now I'm deadlifting this. And it just taught me that if I had the dedication and I had the respect for the training that it deserved, and I followed a process and a program, hence being in the program I'm in now, then I too can achieve what all of these people are achieving as well. And then that was like, cool, if I can do this in the gym, I can do this outside. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just need to be able to swallow my own ego and pride and say, cool, I need help to be able to do this. And so that, for me, training in the gym was the thing that taught me to be able to trust my own instinct and to go with what I decided, and to move away from where I was.
It's almost like a skill that you have to practice constantly. Like, I think people think
every day. Like,
yeah,
I speak with a sponsor every day. You know, I go to meetings 3 times a week. These things all teach me skills, and I learn different things from different people on a daily basis. You know, it's a never-ending journey.
Yeah, I think people a lot of times try to attribute self-love and self-worth to just something that you just someday magnanimously just wake up with. You just feel it from the inside, but there's no, you have to, and you'll have doubts, but you have to work on it constantly. Like, it is a muscle, and you know, your first muscle was CrossFit, and I think, you just have to work at it.
100%.
What's really interesting is that determination, that stick-to-itiveness, the dedication to follow that on a daily basis is literally, to your point, Jacques, it is like a muscle. You know, it is with anything in life, is what we do not use, we lose. And
100%.
It is that dedication, you know, and it applies to many, many different parts of people's lives, whether it be sobriety or, you know, whatever, recovery, anything.
There's been 2 constants in my life, Anthony, since we've known each other.
Yeah.
Mark and CrossFit. Everything else has changed regularly. Yeah.
That is true. And your love of cookies, that has not changed.
I love donuts. Well, donuts now, there's a place here called Grumpy Donuts, and they're out of control, man.
Now it's donuts. Okay.
No,
When he
it's
first met his husband, they would sneak off thinking that we didn't know any better. They would sneak off to grab tea and cookies. It was like, where's Dan and Mark? They're out again.
They're out.
They'll be back.
Yeah. It was a good time.
Tea and cookies was just a metaphor. That's what they told y'all. That's what they wanted you to know.
Jesse, what happened to Jacques? What
do you mean? Jacques?
Like, he started headlining at the Laugh Lounge, and now he's got one-liners left and right.
I always had one-liners. I was just behind the camera, so there was no point in saying them.
He's just biting his tongue the whole time.
Excellent.
So Dan, what's life like now? What's changed for you since this last experience and getting back into a program? And is it AA or NA or something else?
Yeah, so I'm in AA. Obviously, this for me happened all during the pandemic, the COVID.
I was going to ask you, are you in in-person meetings or are you doing the whole Zoom
yeah, so
meeting?
They're not open yet, so it's all online.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and I've just got a new coaching role within a CrossFit gym over here in Australia, and I was talking to the guy that owns it, and I haven't been coaching now for quite some time, and pre-COVID, I was going through my shit, and my mental health was on the decline before I had my relapse, and I was kind of stepping away from coaching, and I started working with a mate in his cafe and just helping out there. And I think COVID for me made it easier to step inside this program, into AA. Like a lot of people, when they hear AA, or for me, for instance, like I heard about AA years ago, and I think I went to one meeting and they was talking about God, and I was like, yeah, see you later, I'm out, peace.
Yeah. And
just left. And I think what this whole experience has enabled me to do is this online thing, because being online and doing the meetings through Zoom, it kind of creates a gap, if that makes sense. So for me, it's made it easier for me to be more open to the program and to sharing and to listening to other people and hearing out for similarities in their stories. Whereas before, when I went to a meeting, it was very much in your face. Like, you're sat in this room and some people share some dark shit, and it's very confronting. And there's a lot of the meetings are very much based around God and religious. They have a religious tendency. And I think I've been very fortunate and very lucky that through this whole experience, I've been able to be connected with some really cool people who have managed to not change the program, but help me understand that, the term God, they use God because it's easy for everyone to understand, and they also use the term higher power. You choose what your higher power is, or you can choose to accept God as you understand him in this present moment. It doesn't have to be Bible bashing people, and I think it's just made it easier for me to be able to sit in the program and share and listen and connect with people.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't spoken to anybody in a while that has been to meetings, went out, and then came back in during COVID to kind of contrast those two experiences, like what it was like before that, going into a meeting. And my experience was like, I needed someone to I was desperate, but I also needed someone to hold my hand walking into that meeting, because I was terrified. And I don't know why. I think it was probably because I wasn't really ready to be seen as an alcoholic or whatever that meant. Because my experience was alcoholics are the guys in the subway panhandling, looking for money, falling over drunk. And don't get me wrong, I was a fall over drunk, but that didn't matter because I was different. You know what I mean? So going into a meeting was admitting something that I was a little bit freaked out to admit.
That's the biggest part, is being able to admit that you again, it comes that I've spent the majority of my life driven by my ego of being able to do everything by myself, right? And so
you're somebody that's self-driven. Yeah, you're self-driven. You've done everything on your own. That's why I was asking you before, because coming into a program and the first step is like admitting that you're powerless and that your life is unmanageable.
Didn't sit right
And
with
like
me
as
for
a
a long
kid
time.
that, yeah, you parented yourself, you and your brother, and you guys were together and you made it out and you did it all on your own and you forged a life ahead, to then be like, you know what, actually, I can't do this. Like, I think I can't do this alone, you know, is probably, again, one of those really hard pills to swallow, right? It's like, my whole thing was I was driven to prove that I could do it on my own, that I could control it,
Yeah.
and that like it didn't have its, you know, meat hooks in me, and that I was the one that was in control. So I'm putting myself again in your shoes and just trying to picture somebody that's like completely done it on his own his whole life, to come in and give that up and say, no, like that's not the way I want to do the future. That's a huge feat.
Yeah, you know, and I've not done it entirely by myself. Like I was lucky to be put in contact with my sponsor from a very early entry into the room. So even before I'd attended the meetings online, I'd already found a sponsor who has guided me up until this point and continues to guide me. And you know, we met for the first time in person last week. You know, and just
Oh,
so
wow.
just like you having someone to kind of hold your hand to go into that room. You know, I've needed someone to kind of guide me, and he was in the first meeting that I attended online. And you know, and I've already said to him, you know, when meetings go back to face, I'm probably going to need you to come along with me and attend that meeting, because otherwise I'm not going to go, man. Like it's a fear. Like there's something fearful about walking into a room of people, and it just, like I said before, this whole internet thing makes it kind of somewhat separated, to then actually walk into a room and sit with you around drugs and alcohol. That's a huge realization, and something that's going to hit you like a brick wall if you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, I mean, the party life, it's like, that's, you're not going to go into a group, like a big crowded group of people sober, right? Like that's generally not like the
No.
experience that I had, at least. Like if I was going into a big crowded bar, I was getting drunk. Like, so the idea of going into like a gregarious
Yeah.
meeting with everyone laughing, smiling, talking, interacting, stone cold sober, can definitely be intimidating. But like my experience is that like that's the practice. Like being in the rooms is like how I practice being a sober individual, so that when I go out of the rooms and I'm in the real world, I'm like, okay, cool. Like I've had that conversation or a similar conversation. I've like felt these feelings before, and I haven't gone out and I haven't taken anything to like get over them, but I've sat in those feelings. And it's like the sober references that you build up by going to meetings and to be around other people. It's a great start to be in the Zoom meetings though, because it's like a very low contact kind of like start to make. So actually, I didn't ever think of that, but that sounds like actually a great way for somebody to get started in the program if they weren't really like excited to get into a full, in-person meeting right off the bat.
Hey, there might be another
It makes
benefit
it
for
more
COVID.
accessible, I guess, for people that are sacrilege. Yeah, exactly. You got to try and find the silver linings, right, during this time, because there's
Exactly.
too much negativity flying around about it at the moment. But how are you guys doing over in New York?
New York is great. How are things in Alabama?
Ignorant. I feel like you should answer New York first. New York is y'all.
New York just started their second phase of reopening. So it is definitely getting on its way. The streets are still very, very empty. So it's not nearly what I think, people at New York. I've always been drawn to it because it has this energy, this constant pulse. However, that's not there right now. It's sort of like it's on this very surreal, sort of slow-mo type of existence. They've just reopened restaurants, so we'll see exactly what that's like over the next couple weeks. And then, is hopefully phase 3. Fitness centers don't reopen until phase 4. So we're waiting to see what that's going to look like. And there's a number of guidelines that are quite extensive for us, which include everything from everyone's temperature, employees' temperatures get taken prior to them coming into this, into the spaces specifically. Everyone needs to be 6 feet apart. If they're less than 6 feet apart, then a mask must be worn. I mean, there's all kinds of guidelines. So it's really kind of interesting to see, but it's nice that we've now progressed onto phase 2. Considering that we were the hotspot in the nation for so long because of the density and proximity of people, in our transportation systems, etc. What's things like in Colorado, Jesse?
I think a couple gyms have opened up. I saw Planet Fitness was opened up. It seems like things are starting to come back to normal a little bit. It's a lot easier than New York to like go outside and just kind of be outside without being surrounded by people. So people are out like biking and running around and things like that. It definitely has a different vibe than New York did.
Well, it's obvious since you've left me in New York that you've been outside because you're tanned beyond belief right now.
Denver is a very sunny. It's probably the opposite of where Dan grew up in the dark South. This is Colorado is one of the sunniest places I've ever been. So grateful for that.
Got it. So Dan, now that you've been in the program itself, what are the things that you look forward to on a day-to-day basis? You have a different support network than you've ever had before, right? How has it changed the way that? Well, because I think you've had your friends and your family and you've had your husband, but I think when you start incorporating you incorporate your meetings and your sponsor and everything else into your life. I think your world expands. It's the relationships that you currently have with your family change in the way that you communicate with them, because I think we change. We start communicating differently, whether that be more honestly or whatever that is. Have you found that, your relationship?
Yeah, I guess the biggest change for me is definitely how I communicate with people and how I see others. I think the biggest thing that you learn from, going into the meetings, I was very quick to kind of, I don't want to say judge people, but judge people based on how they was talking and what they was talking about, and like, I'm so different from them because they're just moaning about their life and pointing the finger. And what this whole experience has taught me is to kind of look at these people, and instead of looking at faults or trying to find faults, you try and find similarities into what they have with you. And it's taught me to, I'm learning through the process with my sponsor as well about what my triggers are and what my defects are in terms of, we can't control how others behave towards us, but we can control how we behave towards them. And I think that's been a big learning curve for me is, even in my relationship with Mark, he would do stuff before which would trigger me, and I'd be like, you don't know, you grew up in this white privileged family and you're this and you're that. And it would instantly turn into this warfare between me and him. And then not that I don't blow up now. There's times where he'll push buttons and I'll blow up, but I'm quicker to sit back and go, cool, this is why it's triggered me. Hey, Mark, let's talk about this. We had a thing the other week about money, right? Money can be a touchy subject, and
sure.
I'm no longer doing the hours that I was doing before. I'm no longer charging as a PT like $150 an hour. So I'm not earning the same money as I was before. And we got into a bit of an argument about money, and, I straight away blew up and pointed at him and was like, this is your fault. And you're trying to do this with money and you're trying to, and afterwards I was like, do you know what? Fuck, man, it's got nothing to do with you. I'm insecure myself about the position that I'm in regarding money because I'm not where I was before. But you know what? I'm okay with that. I have to accept that because where I am right now is giving me the space that I need to work on the shit that I need to work on. And that whole argument was based off of my own insecurities. It had nothing to do with him as an individual or what was going on with. It was all based off me feeling less than and me. And so then I had to feel like I had to defend my position as a human being. And it's that kind of thing for me has been a big shift.
That's huge. Yeah. That's amazing.
That is huge.
It's learning to reflect, learning to self-reflect and to understand when you're getting triggered and why you're getting triggered, and to, you know, and there is no end goal to that. There is no day that you're going to be this all-enlightened person that never makes a mistake and never fucks up, but you will just get better at identifying the core reason as to why your behavior is the way that it is. And hopefully if you keep working on that, you can learn to prevent the majority of those incidences. They'll never go away. You'll always get triggered, but you can manage your response, or should I say you can learn to respond better rather than just to react, right? So a reaction
Super
is
wise word.
Triggers something in you, and we call it the F reaction. You're like, fuck you, and you're a dickhead, and you're this, and you're that, and there's no thought process behind it. You're just defending yourself and inflating your own ego. Whereas if you can learn to respond, it's how you take a situation, you would acknowledge how it's triggered you. You acknowledge the thought, you know, Anthony's pissed me off. I think Anthony's this, but then I don't dramatize it by acting it out and pointing the finger and getting aggressive towards Anthony. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the big thing.
I definitely know what you mean specifically. But I think one thing you were saying was just the idea of like, there is no perfect person. Like the journey of life is that you're always working and getting better and enjoying that. Like, you making sure you do that. I think people get caught up in the idea of like we were saying earlier, with this personified goal of who they want to be, rather than trying to like, no, the journey of life. Well, one key points of it is that you're trying to be the best version of yourself. Like trying to reach that rather than trying to be like whoever this messianic version of you want that to be.
Mm-hmm. You got to be careful not to get caught up in that. And you got to take time to, and this is one thing that I've been guilty of, is you got to take time to reflect on where you've come from and appreciate what you've achieved to this point, and be content in that time as well. Because I think a lot of people, myself included, up until this point, I'm always looking to push and go further and more and more and more and more and more and more, you know. And it's not until I sit back and go, cool, this was my life 15, 20 years ago. This is my life now. There's a big difference, man. And I need to appreciate the work that it's taken for myself to go from this place to this place. There's still a lot to do, and I can still get better, and I can still become a better version of myself, but I've got to learn to appreciate the journey.
Hence why you're on a podcast
called The Journey. You figured out what took me like 5 years to figure out, which is that like that first impulse doesn't ever go away. They say in the program, it's just every year of sobriety gives you one more second of pause. Like, you have a pause button now.
Yeah.
But that crazy first reaction, and it's always been this way with me. Like, I thought when I got sober, it was going to be like, eventually that thought would just disappear altogether, and I would be this like Zen, like, you know, but still, like, it's just, it's something as stupid as like getting my Starbucks coffee and like they put sweetener in it. You know, I get that. I take that first sip, and I like, there's a voice in my head that's like the F's, right?
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then, you know, you've got a couple seconds of pause, and then you can kind of like run through all the things you need to run through to have like a sane response. as opposed to an insane response.
Yeah, an insane response. Yeah. It's even before the program, I did a lot of work on myself spiritually, and I did a lot of work within limiting beliefs. I went and did my yoga teacher training because I thought I was going to be a yogi and be this Zen master, Dan, and that backfired majorly, but that's another story. So a lot of the language that my sponsor's using with me, and a lot of what he talks about, I think I'm lucky in a sense that I've done some reading on that, because coming from the outside in and not having an understanding of that stuff, which is where most addicts are at, it can be a little bit harder to grasp the concepts. So I feel grateful and lucky that I have a little bit of an understanding of what they're talking about, and I think it's making the process a little bit easier for me to follow suit. Yeah, but man, it's been
very cool.
It's been 110 days, and the difference this time round has been life-changing. How I look at my life, and I'm content with where I'm at. I'm still ambitious, don't get me wrong, and I still get caught up in that ambition sometimes and lay awake at night with my anxiety being like, why am I not doing this? Why am I not doing that? But I'm also learning to be a little bit more content with where I'm at, and just how I interact with my relationships, my love relationship, my friendships, my family, and that for me has been calming. Yeah.
That's huge.
If there was anything that knowing what you know now and the journey that you've been through, is there anything that you specifically would want to kind of share with our audience in terms of what you've learned, or any kind of message of hope that you might want to share?
There's like a few key points. Like for me, fitness will always be a huge part of my program. With fitness, you can learn so much about yourself as an individual through fitness. The second point is, don't try and do everything by yourself. As much as it's a hard pill to swallow for people that have felt like they've had to stand on their own 2 feet for the most part of their life, it doesn't make you weaker. It doesn't make you unlovable. It doesn't make you less than putting your hand out and asking someone for help. Like, that's the biggest thing that I can take away from this, is learning to put my hand out and ask for help and saying, I can't do this by myself. It doesn't change my worth as an individual. If anything, it gives me an opportunity to grow into an even bigger individual than what I was before. And yeah, I guess one key phrase that someone said to me just recently was, if you find yourself in a funk that you can't get out of, whether you've tried to go to the gym and get out of it, if you find yourself in a funk or in some sort of negative space that you can't get out of, make it your purpose to do something good for someone else that day. Go and surprise a friend or do something nice for someone else, because when they turn around and you see the happiness in their face, there's no room for anything else. It's just pure happiness, and living in the service of others is truly one of the best ways to bring true happiness and joy to your soul, rather than just this aesthetic outside thing. Like, do serve with others, look after other people, and your soul will look after you.
And I think that's a really important point, because one of the reasons why we started this podcast was because Jesse had this brilliant idea, and we just saw so much opportunity for us to really share that and to give people the strength to listen to other people and listen to everyday stories and successful journeys, and whether the journeys are continuous and lifelong, is to listen to these stories and to listen and find inspiration in them, and also find similarities in all of us. That you're never in this alone, that we're all in this together.
100%. Yeah, man.
Hell yeah.
Do you guys have any more questions for him?
No.
I know.
I just
Are you
came off
crying
the
over
heels. I just came off the heels of another very intense conversation right before this one. So I'm like, I'm gonna go buy me some ice cream after this. Like I need.
That is also that is also a great way to treat yourself kindly.
Yeah, ice cream.
Yes. Right, Dan? Wait, is that Mark?
No, Mark's the ice cream thing. Messina.
Yeah.
We have this thing called Messina here. It's like crack, bro. It's ridiculous.
Oh, I think I've seen that. Is that is it ice cream or is it
It's
what's
gelato.
the other one? Gelato.
Gelato.
Yeah. Oh, that's good stuff.
You never had anything till you had fried chicken cooked in cake batter. So
fried chicken cooked
solid
in
point.
cake batter.
What are
Solid
they doing
point.
to you in the South?
Not me. I'm not eating that stuff. I want to live till
That is
past
a
50.
lie.
Oh no. I can't even get that in this city. Like I would have to go to Louisiana. But I'm telling you, like everyone has their version of like death food.
Yeah,
Okay.
mine's donuts. Definitely donuts and burgers.
Donuts are like whoever came up with the idea of donuts. We need to have a holiday just for him. Like donuts are just so.
Donut. I think there is a World Donut Day.
I love donuts. I love donuts.
Now we have regressed into sugar.
Love
Look,
donuts.
Daniel Lucas, it is all the way from Sydney, Australia. It has absolutely been a joy speaking with you. All the way from here in New York is I love you to pieces. I have been fond of you and your husband since the time that I first met and interviewed both of you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us here at the Journey NYC podcast. We look forward to, talking to you again in the future and finding out where your journey leads you, because I know that it's just got more muscle ups in your future.
More. Thank you every day, man. Thank you for having me on and being able to talk to you guys and share, and hopefully this will reach someone out there that's doing it tough and inspire them to make some changes, man.
Well, and if the change starts with reaching out and telling someone that I need help, then that's where it starts. And that's the whole reason why we put this together. So thank you again just for your time. I know it's early and you've got work to go to, but thank you for joining us on the podcast itself. Jacques, Jesse, it's been a pleasure sharing, my relationship with Dan and his amazing story with you guys. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well.
It was incredible. Thank you for the time, Dan.
No worries. Thanks, guys.